In the world's greatest country, in its most pivotal state, lies Pennsylvania's Lehigh Valley, an economic hub that's as vibrant as it is ideologically eclectic. Its just over 700,000 residents will play a critical role in deciding the course of American leadership and thereby the world. Who are the thinkers, workers, and leaders that will decide our collective fate? Join me, Moshe Kurtz, as I walk through the valley and find out. Welcome, my friends, and thank you for joining me today as I walk through the valley with Pastor Johnny Lopez, who serves as the Executive Director of Youth for Christ Lehigh Valley and a pastor at the West End Church in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Now, Pastor Lopez, when we first met each other, I was kind of fascinated by your career because I kind of grew up, and I wouldn't say from my early childhood, but by the time I was in late high school, certainly in college, I knew I was going down the clergy route. You spent about 20 years in corporate sales and then for some reason pivoted into what you are doing today. And I think before we get into like the big questions about your current work, just help me understand, how did you get from corporate sales into the business of religion, so to speak?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Well, thanks for having me, first and foremost, Rabbi Kurtz. So in my life, the pivot came as a long-time calling. It wasn't necessarily a suddenly. It was a climactic moment in my life where I knew from a very young age that I was called to shepherd at some point in my life. For me, it was beyond just going to school and learning how to do this and getting the education biblically and religiously and all those things. It was a lot of character development for the calling. It was a lot of experience with God and also with God's people and serving within my church and the local community, where it was a climactic moment again in my life, this pivotal moment where it came, a lot of changes happened in my life at that same time that launched me into pastorship. So my family, we say in the Christian world, was saved, by the grace of God. What does it mean to be saved? Is that like a realization? Is that an act? What's that look like? Yeah, so in Christianity, we acknowledge that we are all created by God, right? By his design, on purpose, for his glory, right? Sin is what separates us from God. And so we are born into sin. And so until we don't realize that we are sinful people, we really can create big messes in life because of the nature that we're born into. And so my parents were married already about 9 years at the time. My dad was into alcohol heavy. Oh, wow. He was singing in nightclubs in New York City. He was in soccer leagues. He was a huge extrovert. He was a life of the party, but alcoholism was really affecting him and my parents' marriage. And so my mom had called it quits. They were about to get a divorce. She kicked him out the house. And so at that moment, at that pivotal moment in my mom's life and my parents' life, Christ came in. So we go to church. We get invited by some friends that invited us to the church. And I remember walking into a church for the first time, a Christian church, and hearing some Sunday school stories. They were learning about Samson that morning. Like, I've never heard stories like this before, right? So I was intrigued.
That's a fun one also.
Yeah, it is. So by the time we get to the service, the pastor's preaching, and he's encouraging people within the congregation through the scripture. And he makes this call. My mom responds. And it was so impactful to me that this man was impacting so many people in the room. There was probably 200 people in the room, including my mom. And she gave her life to Jesus. She surrendered her life to Jesus. And at that moment, everything changed for her. 3 months later, my dad makes the same decision, never went back to alcohol again.
Wow.
God restores my parents' marriage. I now start growing up in the ways of the Lord, going to church and things like that. And I was very passionate, not just about the religious aspect of church per se, but it was about the transforming power of what we call the gospel, right? And how that wasn't only exclusive for my parents' life, but for anyone that would come to the knowledge of Jesus.
Right. So religion wasn't just simply a matter of abstract theology for you, but it really was something that was able to kind of save your entire family dynamic from imploding on itself.
Right.
So, okay. So help me understand this, because I know that you had this religious experience, your family had this religious experience early in life, but only later in life you go into pastoring as a profession, but you were in corporate sales for a bit. So does one build on the other, where you were selling material items, now you're selling, religion?
Right.
Do they connect with each other?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I have a passion to share the gospel with people. I love meeting people. I love engaging with people, getting to know their story, but also sharing like God's story and how that connects, right? So you can say I wasn't selling it, but I was passionately sharing the gospel with people all throughout middle school, high school, and my teenage years. I was heavily involved in my local church in Brooklyn. We used to translate from my pastor. It was a Spanish congregation, so I would translate from Spanish to English. I was involved with the youth in the community, involved with the worship team and things like that, and just anything that was needed, I was always making myself available.
Yeah, it reminds me, there's a medieval Jewish theologian, Nachmanides, and he explained that it's once you're so passionate about something and you love something so much, how can you not share it with others? That's just the natural next step about something that you are so enraptured with.
Right.
So that definitely resonates with me as well. Now, I see how that goes into religion, and I understand that you are a pastor at a church currently. I know you are taking the next steps in growing your congregation and wishing you, God willing, much success. But also you are the executive director of Youth for Christ in the Lehigh Valley.
Right.
So you're not just simply working with the older end of the generations, which maybe that's what occupies a church building or a synagogue or a mosque more frequently, but you're actually reaching out to the younger generation, and particularly with inner city youth is my understanding. So I would love to understand. I mean, I always had this challenge. Whenever I'm asked to, meet with teenagers and whatever, and people think I'm like this really relatable guy, I'm just like, I don't know what to talk to teenagers about. My music interests are cut off at like the 80s, maybe the 90s. I don't know what to talk to them about. So how does that work? How do you engage with the youth of today, and what are the challenges that you might have?
So I did youth work in New York prior to moving to Pennsylvania 20 years ago. When I was in college, I was part of a ministry called CRU, Campus Crusade for Christ. And so I was equipped to engage young people and have these meaningful conversations about life, purpose, and God. And so I had that background experience, right? That was probably some of my most purposeful years of my life, right? And then when I moved to Pennsylvania, I went into the corporate career. I had to get a job, grow up, right? Almost like that Peter Pan story from the movie Hook, if you're familiar.
You never want to grow up?
Never want to grow up, but then you forget about what it is to be young, because now you just become an adult and you do that. And so 20 years in the corporate world, I learned a lot. I got married, got a house, right? Got established, good work-life balance, always working in my local community in the church. So in my 20s and 30s, I learned a lot about life and working with families and adults. My passion was always the youth. And so I get an opportunity to meet Youth for Christ Lehigh Valley. Lehigh Valley Youth for Christ has been around since 1971. So they've been doing great work in the Valley for a very long time. I get to meet them around 2023, and in 2024, I stepped out into being the executive director. So when you talk about engaging with youth, it was funny because at the same time in my local church, which is Rivers of Life, Cyber Church in Allentown, inner city church, right in the center city of Allentown, we were asked to lead youth and young adults. And so when I used to lead youth in my younger years, it was to millennials. Now it's to Gen Z. And so if you can imagine, this is a fully digital generation, right? And so what we found was, in engaging with Gen Z, is that, yes, they just went through COVID. So there's some social elements that there's higher anxiety. They're not easy to connect right up front.
Right. There was a stunting in social development during COVID because you couldn't interact with other people if you were hunkered down and locked inside.
Right. And then they were also bombarded with a lot of opinions.
Right. So they're just on their TikTok videos all day. And do you have to make TikTok dance videos to appeal to them?
I do not, no.
Oh, God bless you.
No,
God.
no. I don't think they want me to dance, but I think here's the point with these generations, Gen Z and Gen Alpha, they're fully digital, right? Like Gen Alpha, they're probably the oldest right now, about 15 years old. So 15 years ago, the iPad comes out. Okay, just so we have an awareness. And then Instagram becomes like the #1 app of the year, right? And so think about that. Their whole life, they have technology at the access to their fingertips. And it's not just the hardware, it's the access that they're getting through the web, high opinions, things that are marketed to them, the algorithm that's being catered to them. And so all of this is framing their perspective on life, on social issues, on religious questions that they might have, on anything, right, is at the access to the fingertips, including immorality and all those things, right?
Right. I mean, I know in some communities, I know in the Jewish community and the more Orthodox, I'm wondering if Christians have this as well. There have been attempts to filter internet access for young adults and frankly for adults in general because of the unfettered access to God knows what that's out there on the internet.
Yeah. And so what we see is like, because of technology, constant dopamine fixes, right? There is a we would call it a desensitizing to human interaction, human behavior, and human responsibility.
So how do you address such a challenge? You built up the case of how it's so challenging. How do you address something like that?
And this is what I tell anybody, because I was recently asked, do you feel like Gen Z, Gen Alpha, they don't respect anyone, they don't honor anything? And I said, the answer to me is no, because no matter what generation, from beginning of time till now, you win with humans, and you got to earn people's trust. And so, yes, it may take different means, but in our belief, we follow the way of Jesus Christ, and Jesus was a rabbi, right? And so Jesus, his thing was winning with people, and I call that relational equity. John Maxwell says, you have to first win a heart before you ask for a hand in leadership. And so if we're going to lead a generation, if we're going to lead from our homes to our communities, to society, or whatever it is, we have to earn their trust. We're not entitled for people to trust us. And I think many generations have different mindsets about this very topic. And so they won't do because I said so. Right? They won't follow suit because this is just the way things are. They have questions. And here's the truth. Questions do not equal to questioning. Right? I think we confuse that sometimes. They have a lot of questions. And I think we need to be more sharper with being able to answer the questions that these generations are asking. That's not always on understanding here in the mind, but they have questions in their soul.
So how do you actually earn their trust, right? It's not about making cutesy TikTok videos and dances. And considering that you're in a different generation than them, how have you been able to build that rapport? What do you do? Do you just like go on the street and say, hi, my name is Pastor Lopez?
Sometimes.
Oh, actually?
Yeah, I do. So like, for example, Allen High School, a few blocks away from us here in the West End. I go, and I don't go to the campus first. We would think if we want to reach kids, we go to the high school campus. No, West Park, right? I'll get to West Park a few minutes before the first class lets out at the end of the day. Kids are walking through. We engage in conversations. How you doing? What's the heaviest thing on your mind? What questions do you have about life? What do you think about God?
They don't just turn around and run for it. They actually engage?
Well, yeah. And you know, I'm from New York, so I wear my hats, right? I'll wear my sneakers. And
you fit right in.
Yeah, I'll fit right in. But they have questions, and when a human gives them the opportunity to not just ask, but starts informing them on questions they may have that's outside of ChatGPT or TikTok and all these social media venues, that human touch, now you start building trust. And it could be just for that moment, or it could be a relationship, right? And ideally, we want our faith community to get more involved within the community, not just through programs, but I think we forgot about the one, right? You go after every person, every individual. And so every human interaction, especially with a younger generation, could go a long way.
Amazing. Well, I might need to take a course over here. It sounds like what you're doing is really working, but what you're saying really is that it's not about doing all these different kinds of fancy methods and different little schemes to get them into the church or to make them think about God and religion. It's really just being a normal human being that they can interact with. And that's something that I guess I just don't appreciate how much that's lacking today.
Yep.
Excellent. So I want to shift a little bit to something maybe a little bit heavier than that. You're working with the inner city community, and I checked with you off camera beforehand to make sure you identify as part of you are part of the Latino community, just objectively.
Yep.
And I think what's interesting, part of the reason I'm doing this podcast series is that I want to understand the different residents of the Lehigh Valley. And we're here in Allentown, and I think it's actually predominantly Hispanic at this point.
It's like 55 to 60% Latino in Allentown.
Wow. So that's a solid majority right over there. And, my understanding is that a lot of people who are more in the political sphere, they kind of try to put the Latino community into a box, and really to their detriment many times. One thing that really interests me, this is a question, I guess, vis-a-vis your theology, also vis-a-vis sociology, is, where do you guys stand kind of on the social issues? I'm talking things like same-sex marriage, abortion, what have you. I'm just kind of curious to understand. I always understood the Latino community, again, I can't overgeneralize because you're not a monolith, just like no community is a monolith, but as perhaps a little bit more traditional on these issues. Is that true? Is my impression correct?
Yes. And family is huge in the Latino community. Family support, if someone has a kid, they can't raise a kid, the grandparent is always there. They're around to help raise that kid. There's a village that helps support, with a lot within the Latino community. There's a lot of love, a lot of nurture. The way I grew up, I'm from an Ecuadorian background. Both my parents are from Ecuador, and so they immigrated from Ecuador. I was born and raised here in the U.S., but I never lacked in love when it came to family, because if one person didn't provide it, I got it elsewhere. And we still find that within our community. So in the Lehigh Valley, you have a heavy Dominican community, Puerto Rican. You got some Ecuadorians out there, Mexican. There's some Colombians I've seen, and they continue to immigrate, not just from Central America, but also South America. And so every single one of those countries, yes, Latino, but they have their own individual values and backgrounds and things that mean a lot to them.
That's true. We can't just throw everyone into one category. So in the Jewish world, we have what we call Sephardic Jews. And that actually is a catch-all term for Jews ranging from Egypt to Iran and everywhere in between. And it's not fair because every single country and even every city within there has its own subculture. But with that qualification and caveat being given. So where does your church and where does your community that you service, where do you guys stand on these things like these important social issues in America?
So I'm a pastor, so it's not a secret that I believe in the Bible, and we believe that that's God's word. And so through God's word, we get to learn that God is immutable. And so what that means is that his nature and his character and his ways are unchanging.
That's something I can sign on to as well.
So we believe that. And so because he is unchanging, therefore society, culture, generations do not dictate God's original design when it comes to morals. And so what I find is, and let's say for the Latino community, if you are raised with those type of values or that type of religious upbringing, and we're going to say biblical because there is religiosity without the biblical context. It's more like my tradition is religious, but I'm not true to the text, And so there is a difference there. And so kind of what our heart is as a church, as a community of faith here in the Lehigh Valley in the West End, is that we read what the text says and we take it for God's ways, for God's design, for God's nature, for God's truth. And if we follow that, that does not a transformation in our opinions, in our perspectives. Those are secondary or third level type of changes. They first deal with our heart. They deal with the needs in our soul. The brokenness that I talked about earlier that we're born into, Understanding God's statutes that are higher than our ways. So you talk about abortion, you talk about same-sex marriage, any issue that exists in society or that is political per se, what I tell people is when we minimize the emotions on these topics, when you even step a little bit away from, because because it's a very family-oriented community, we can say, well, my daughter believes in that, and so I'm going to support my daughter. Or my son believes in that, and so I'm going to support my son. It becomes family first. Now, as a community of faith, we say family is a priority, but God comes first.
Right.
And so do his ways. And if I submit to that, then he will give me the wisdom to lead my family. And when that gets broken, you get the byproduct of the society that we live in today, which everybody has, morality is relative.
Mm-hmm.
And it's no longer based on a foundation that is beyond us because we didn't create ourselves, in essence, right?
Right. You know, it reminds me of what it says in Isaiah. Isaiah says, really speaking on behalf of God, Lo machshavosai machshavosechem, my thoughts are not yours. That there's human intelligence and there's God's intelligence, and we're trying to strive for God's intelligence. Though I guess the one thing, I don't want to go too off the rails or talking about theology per se, though I am very fascinated with theology. And what I do as my main day job is in Judaism, you know, taking same-sex marriage is a little bit more straightforward, but taking something like abortion, certainly even within the more traditional Orthodox context, there's no explicit verse in the Torah, in the Bible, that says, thou shalt not abort a fetus. There's discussions that might allude to it.
Right.
So even within traditional Orthodox Jewish theology, there's debates about whether abortion constitutes murder, which I think might be in line with what you're describing. That's Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. There's other rabbis who are medical ethicists, Rabbi Eliezer Woldenberg, who said that it doesn't constitute murder. It's a lower level prohibition that can be superseded if there are psychological or health considerations regarding the fetus, if they have a disease like Tay-Sachs. So, you know, I think I'm not here, I don't want to debate religion. But I think there's some things like are more explicit in the Bible, and there's some things that might be a little bit more open for interpretation. But I very much, what you're saying resonates with me, the clarity that if we're trying to follow God's ways, we got to see what it says in his holy book that he gifted to us.
At least approach it with that openness, right?
I totally get that.
But can I share something quick about that point? So Psalm 139 says that we are fearfully and wonderfully made. He knit us together in our mother's womb. That's by God's design. Before our opinions, before we know if there's any defects or not, before all those things, by design, God knits us together. And every single thread, every single aspect of that, that's detailed. Personally, you know, my story is I died in my mother's womb at 6 months. I stopped kicking. My mom wants to get checked. They said, we need to abort this child because he no longer has life.
Oh my gosh.
She didn't want to do anything at that moment. She said, I need to go home and think about this. Lays in bed, prays, wasn't a religious person, but prays, says, God, you can't take away this child from me. And she felt miraculously a hand touch her womb, and I start kicking within seconds.
And this was after the doctors had thrown in the towel. Wow, that's remarkable.
It's my personal story. I'm not going to go and convince and tell anyone that they should or should not believe. I mean, I'm not going to force their opinion. I'm only going to tell them, number one, this is what I read and how I interpret God's word to be and what it states about murder, right? About life, about conception, those things. But then I do have a personal story. If my mom would have listened to that advice and aborted me, I wouldn't be here today.
So this isn't just an abstract theological discussion for you. This is your real lived experience.
Correct.
That is remarkable. Well, actually, I do want to get to know a little bit more about you.
Okay.
And I think our listeners might enjoy it as well. So this is a little bit of a, you know, I'm asking this because this is personally what I think about.
Okay.
So you work together at the church with your wife?
I do.
You do? What's her name?
Yadira.
Yadira?
Yeah.
So I'm always curious about this. You know, in the clergy, I'm sure this is true, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, whatever it is, there's always this question about the role of the spouse. And is the spouse supposed to be working together with you as a partner, or are they in the supporting role? So what's your relationship like? Are you guys professional partners in addition to being spouses?
Yes. So we are co-pastors. We pastor the church together, and we are like a pastoral team, what we would call it. So COVID kind of launched us into kind of warming up to actually working together. Like we were both working from home. We had our jobs. I had my corporate job. She was working for a nonprofit.
I remember that time. My wife would be in one room on one Zoom call. I'd be in another room on the other Zoom call.
Right.
We'll get coffee together in the kitchen and then go back.
Right. And it was interesting because that's my only coworker with that and my dog Oliver, right, in the house. And so that was a test of it. And then I still needed to check out after work, kind of breathe a little bit mentally and all that. But with my wife, shortly after, like in 2022, we got asked to lead youth and young adults in my former church. Mm-hmm. And so now we had obviously pray for God's direction in leading Gen Z, but then put a strategy behind it. And there was a two-level approach to this. It was not just building youth and young adults, but it was also building leadership that would be able to exist even beyond our time as youth leaders. And so that was a beautiful season that we got to co-labor together in both developing leadership and also developing young people in their faith in their generation.
So when you guys go on vacation, do you ever have to set a rule? We're not going to talk about the church while we're on vacation. How do you navigate that?
That's a great question. And so like even stepping into pastorship, it's even more pressure, more weight, more responsibility.
I mean, are clergy ever truly on vacation anyway?
I don't know, but it is. So this is what we do intentionally. We take time out to physically rest. We also seek times to rest in our souls. Mm-hmm. And there is Sabbath, right? For us, we have Sunday services. And so Mondays is normally our day off, where we get to rest, we get to reconnect, we get to seek the Lord together, we get to go in scripture.
I've made the mistake of trying to visit churches on Mondays and always having closed doors. Now I understand why. Once you say that, it makes a lot of sense.
That's exactly why. And so we love to have fun. We're still young, right? We've been trying to have kids. We don't have kids yet, but friendships and relationships are very important for us. Family is very important for us, not in that order. Family first, right? Then friends, then being within the community and doing things that are fun. And so with her, she's my best friend. Honestly, I've known her since we were teenagers. Wow. And so we were friends for 10 years before we started dating.
Wow.
So we have a long history of friendship. So the direct answer to how we are able to mesh and gel together when it comes to ministry and doing the work that we do is that we honor each other as children of God, then as friends and as spouses. And we try to work in oneness in everything that we do. We're not perfect, but there is intentionality behind what we do and how we do it.
That's remarkable. And what do you like to do? You know, when you're not officially pastoring and saving the youth of the Lehigh Valley, I mean, what do you do for fun?
Yeah. So, and I'm in my Clark Kent times.
I like that.
Yeah. And I put the glasses on. I love photography. I'm super passionate about photography.
Yeah, you walk around with that really cool camera.
My little vintage digital looking thing. But I'm passionate about capturing life's moments. I think life is beautiful. I love capturing people in moments and interactions, whether it be family, friends, or just moments in the community. I love landscapes, right? I see the beauty of God in every day, just looking out the window, walking around and seeing beautiful sunsets, all that type of thing. I love capturing seasons of life. And then I play bass and drums. My dad was a singer, so, music is in my blood. And so bass is where I go and I seclude sometimes outside of prayer, right? I just go and I play my bass, and it's an instrument that comes out of my soul.
Can you ever bring those instruments into prayer?
I could. Yeah. I listen to worship music. And so sometimes it could be praise music, right? And it's lively, or it could be just soulful, moments that are more like settled type of moments of intimacy. And there's notes there that I can play that are connected to my worship to God.
Beautiful. And I want to try this question over here. I don't know if you're a fan of Star Trek. I grew up more like my dad was a Trekkie, and then he kind of imparted this into me. So there was this scenario called the Kobayashi Maru, which basically is Starfleet Academy. You would do this scenario where you're trying to save a ship that's in intergalactic, international, whatever territory. You are suddenly out of nowhere assaulted by the enemy ship. There's no way you're going to win this scenario. You are for sure going to fail, but the test is, how do you fail? How do you handle the setback? Are you cool under pressure? Do you have good leadership qualities? So are there any setbacks in your life, whether it be your pastorship or more broadly, and how did you handle that?
So my greatest setback, you can consider setbacks failures. For me, it was more of a test, right?
Mhm.
Because you can study, you can know and have knowledge. They call wisdom the application of knowledge, how to rightfully apply it. But perseverance and endurance is really tested in trials. And so for me, it was the loss of my father's life.
Oh, wow.
In 2024, within a matter of 3 weeks, I lost my dad. He died at 73 from cancer. I left my job of 16 and a half years at the company I was with to step into pastoring. And I left my church of 19 years to go and plant a church. And so those are 3 different levels of grief that I was going through. And so it really, number one, it tested my faith because it was very easy to do what I did in an environment that was corporate because there's a corporate covering there, right? Yeah. And so I'm just assigned to do my job. In my church, I was under someone else's leadership and I was serving in the way I was serving. But with my dad, you only have one dad and now he's no longer around. Wow. So what I learned was what I was really made of, what was really in me. All this life of faith that I've lived, this whole story of life experiences came to the test and it was put in fire because Johnny, without grief, is running 100 miles an hour all the time, super joyful, extroverted, and I love all that stuff. And then grief really hit a big pause button.
Wow.
There was some things that were happening in my soul that I couldn't even explain. I had very silent moments, very quiet moments. A lot of my support systems were no longer around. I didn't know how to engage with people. I didn't know how to explain what I was feeling. And so that was something where I really had to lean into everything I knew about God and actually live and trust Him by faith.
I mean, I can't imagine that because I remember at the beginning of our conversation, you were telling me about how, your dad was able to overcome the alcoholism when they found God. And then just for that to happen to you in life after being able to pull themselves up from there, I can't imagine how much of a struggle that must be. And does that help inform how you are able to pastor your flock and the kids that you meet on the street? Do you take that experience with you?
Absolutely. And here's why. I was blessed to grow up with a family that was in God, right? Mm-hmm. And God turned around our story during my most formative years of life. And I had a lot of love. Financially, we were not at the best. My parents both lost their job the first year they gave their life to Jesus.
Wow.
So that was like an immediate test of faith, and they had to start relying on God by faith right from the beginning of their walk in God. So it wasn't just, I'm going to go to church now, or I'm going to believe this stuff. It's like, I really got to trust. So I saw a lot of faith in my family, right? Now that my father isn't around, he persevered through cancer for 27 years. He battled cancer.
27 years.
And you could never tell because he was extremely high in his joy. He was a worshiper. He worshiped the Lord. And so he would sing to God and praise God in the midst of all that, right? He was a mentor to men, right? And so I'm watching this, and sometimes you don't appreciate something until it's not around anymore because you can't really be reflective when it's live in front of you. And so I'm enjoying my dad. I'm enjoying seeing what he's doing. And my dad is my dad. He had a larger than life personality. But once he's gone, now we're almost 2 years later. For me, I'm highly reflective on his life, but I get to understand deeper what it is to finish well in life, right? Not just live the life experience, but to live with intentionality to finish well, to impact people, and then legacy.
Well, I think I couldn't think of a more appropriate lead into our final question, which is I like to ask people, I know I have a little bit of a kitschy name for it, but I call it the Lehigh legacy, which is, you've done so much with your career. You've overcome so much adversity to get to where you are, and God should bless you with many more years on this earth to continue your good work. After whatever our time is in this world, when you look back, what are you hoping your legacy is going to be?
Yeah, that's a very personal question to me, and I probably could not have answered it with as much consciousness prior to my dad passing than I can now. I feel like when I saw him pass literally in front of me, I saw him go from this life that I'm familiar with and known into eternity.
Mm.
And when you live with intention and purpose for God, for the glory of God, that makes so much sense when you see someone go and pass and transition into, it's not, for us, it's not a hypothetical, it's not a maybe, it's not a what if, it's a certainty. It's the blessed assurance of our faith, right? And so for me, legacy, I want to leave a legacy that everyone that I've ever encountered or has ever met me has left encouraged. I think we need more encouragement in life, and I love to encourage people, uplift, edify, build, and is inspired to live life more purposeful and intentional, but not just for themselves and for their own, but in serving others in any sphere of influence and capacity that they can, but even greater, serving God with their life.
Well, I can certainly say after this conversation that I am walking away more encouraged and inspired to do that. So you definitely have at least one follower, though I know you have many more than just myself.
Yeah.
So Pastor Johnny Lopez, thank you for your time, and I appreciate you joining me as I walk through the valley.
Thank you, Rabbi Kurtz.
Thank you for joining me as I walk through the valley. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to rate and subscribe to our show. If you have questions or would like to book a live recording or have a speaking request, please email rabbi@sonsofisrael.net. This is Moshe Kurtz. I look forward to having you join me next time as I walk through the valley.